Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, although I'm not going to be crazy enough to make much in the way of predictions for this year, there are some key political issues that are worth talking about. What's going to happen at the local elections? Will any political parties change their leader this year? What will be the voting intention polls at the end of the year? And although my crystal ball is out for repair, there are things we can say about all of those areas. But first, for daily political commentary, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out. So I wasn't really going to say anything about predictions for this year because I can't really think of a year where there are so many vital unknowns before. In most years, there are some things you can see a trajectory and say, yeah, this is going to happen. But politics professor Rob Ford, some of you may know about, has decided to offer up some of his own predictions. Very brave. And the thinking behind his answers, I think, had a few holes in them. Not that I think he's wrong, but I think he missed a few relevant factors out. And it may have just been because he was just doing a Twitter thread. But inspired by that, I think, well, so what do I think are the pressures pulling on the strands of fate for British politics this year? Well, the biggest political event of the year is going to be the local elections in May. And the topics which will be under constant discussion will be the stability of leaderships and polling results. Now, just very briefly, Ford thinks that Labour will be in significantly worse shape in the polls by the end of this year, thinks they're going to fall much further, that no political party will change its leader, that the Conservatives could take hefty losses in the local elections, although how badly depends on how many and which seats exactly are contested. And I'm not going to disagree with any of the thinking, but I do think there are some additional factors worth thinking about. So, let's take polling as the main thing, because polling is going to apply the pressure to all the other issues as well. How the local elections go depends on national polling as well. The stability of leaders, how well or badly leaders are doing, depends on their national polling. Everything depends on that sort of voting intention poll. So there isn't currently a consistent polling narrative in terms of exactly where the main parties are. But there is a consistent view that Labour have lost vote share fairly heavily. Reform UK have gained it. And the Tories are either about where they were at the election or slightly improved. I don't think polls are really suggesting that the Tories have lost ground since the election. Ford thinks that Labour will suffer further this year, and that both the Conservatives and Reform UK will be undisputedly ahead of Labour by the end of this year. His thinking is based on the pace of delivery. He makes the point, look, it takes time to pass legislation, and indeed, Labour's major legislation is being passed this year. Remember, it's still going through Parliament. It's not going to have finished going through Parliament until the end of the year. And then when you've passed your legislation, then you need to allow time for the changes to happen, for these laws to actually take effect. Then you need more time for the public to even notice those changes. And then you need even more time before people realise that those changes are actually down to something the government did. And I totally agree with that. However, I think there are other factors at play as well. So what are the factors that affect Labour's polling right now? Well, the first, as Ford says, it's impatience for change from the public. You take the front page of the Daily Mail today. So much for cutting energy bills, it says, because energy bills are rising. Now, these energy bill rises were baked in with the Conservatives. It should be a ridiculous headline. Labour's promise to cut energy bills was based on a massive expansion of cleaner energy. They weren't just coming in and saying, they're just charging too much, we'll lower the bills. No, they were going to move towards cheaper energy and move away from the volatile international prices of fossil fuels. But the planning legislation's still going through Parliament. It will be several years before Labour's new energy infrastructure is built. But the reason this headline isn't utterly ridiculous, that it will work on some people, is because the public are not thinking, well, it takes ages to bring change, we'll just have to wait. They expect changes more quickly than is realistically possible. So until those positive changes are noticed, which isn't going to be for a while for most voters, they will just think that Labour are no better than Conservatives. They voted for change, right? And they'll be thinking, well, not really much better off now, are we? Ironically, actually, people are, statistically. Across the country, most people are actually better off this winter than last winter. But they don't necessarily feel that, because they're not getting that message from Labour. And the media certainly aren't giving that message. So yeah, the public are just going to assume, well, things are still crap. Therefore, Labour are just as crap as the Conservatives, and Starmer will keep leaking support. Another factor is the way the media report things, aggressively briefing against absolutely everything now that Labour are in government, whether that Labour are doing it or not. In fact, they're even attacking Labour for some policies that the Conservatives implemented. They didn't talk about them at the time because the Conservatives were in government, they wanted them to win. But now they suddenly start talking about them. And they almost never mention the positive policies. There's no point in complaining about this, of course. It's how they are. And without media reform, it's how they will continue to be as well. But it is a factor in the polling. And again, this backs up the idea that Labour could fall further in the polling. But another factor is Labour's own political game. Starmer's taken the view that unpopularity now is just down to those tough decisions, but that it will go back up when people see the positive changes which those tough decisions paid for. He is right to an extent. However, some of the political hits Labour have taken have been unnecessary. There's been a small number of their policies that came with very high political costs, but low to zero, sometimes negative economic benefits. So Labour have taken a hit that they didn't need to just because of literally 3 policies that they didn't have to go ahead with, or they could have done differently. Also, Labour are failing to communicate optimism to the public. This is insane. In opposition, you want people to be pessimistic about the future so that they change the government. In government, you want them to be optimistic about the future so that they don't change the government. Labour are taking for granted that they have all these years to go before the election and that people will, well, when we deliver the benefits, the people will see that and go, oh, yeah, brilliant, we'll vote Labour again. And it's like, that might happen. But, you know, they don't want to be glib about it. They won this year with a very low vote share. They don't have a lot to play with. You know, what happens if Labour, like, let's say Labour are going to deliver a lot of things, but what say, you know, the public don't think it's enough? Or what if the public do think it's enough, but they don't give the government credit for it? Because the media will certainly try to say it was down to other factors. Starmer needs to keep hammering the specific better times coming, not just saying, oh yeah, we're going to introduce change. What is it? What's going to improve about your lives? And keep saying it. So that when it happens, people credit the government with, well, the government said this would happen and now it's happened. Also, being optimistic has a better chance of the public giving the government the time they need. You know, it's possible that Labour will realise this at some point. You know, you take retail at the moment, the retail figures for December, I've said before, are likely to be very bad. A lot of retailers have already been, talking about the fact that they're not being great. Partly that might be down to the fact that people just don't think things are going to get better when actually they are. You know, so Labour could choose to start fighting back on the PR game and start communicating with the public more consistently with the messages of delivery. So although Labour could indeed be worse off in the polls at the end of this year than they are now, if Labour fundamentally changed their attitude to public messaging, which I'm not confident about, but it's possible, then they could improve. But let's work on the basis that Labour's polling will get worse, because in the absence of any signs that Labour care right now, that has to be the default belief. How will that affect the local elections and leadership stability? Well, although Labour may be looking at the local elections with some trepidation, they've already lost quite a few by-elections. It's the Conservatives who will be most concerned. Like, we don't know exactly which seats are up for grabs. Bizarrely, normally we would. It's because Labour are making big changes to local governance, which will be coming into effect before next year. So some local authorities will have the option and take the option to delay the elections for a year, just so that they can have the elections once those changes have been implemented. Now, because a lot of the seats potentially up for grabs this year were won in 2021, during the vaccine bounce for the Conservatives, they're more likely to take a big hit this year. Not as big now that they're in opposition, because there is now no need to vote against the Conservatives just to give the Conservatives a punch in the face. They're in opposition now, but they are still likely to lose a lot. And Reform UK will be hoping to profit, as well as the Greens and the Lib Dems, but the Reform UK will be the main. Like, the Lib Dems and the Greens will get a little bit of a mention in the news because there'll be an election on, but it'll be bare minimum. Reform UK will be all over the place. So although Labour, being the party of government now, can expect to face losses, because they're going to have the public go, well, we're going to teach you a lesson by voting against your councillors. It's the Tories who are actually braced for some very bad headlines. So will this mean that Badenoch is under pressure for her position? Well, she'll certainly be under more pressure than Starmer. Some of the people trying to suggest that Starmer's under pressure, it's incredibly nonsensical. After the previous election, Labour were down and out. Now they've won a massive majority. Remember, 3 years ago when Partygate was destroying Boris Johnson, and he had just lost a seat in a by-election that was one of the party's safest ever seats, been Tory for 200 years, people were saying, well, Boris Johnson, we need to get rid of him. But he was still there half a year later because, first of all, there was no one obvious to replace him with. But also Johnson retained the loyalty of a lot of Tory MPs who felt, as far as they were concerned, they couldn't have won their seats without him. And they would lose their seats at the next election without him. So he had a lot of loyalty. Same's true of Labour and Starmer. Starmer more than doubled the number of Labour MPs. That's a lot of MPs who are going to be loyal. Also, most MPs realise that Labour are going to deliver. Like, one problem for the Tories, they had no confidence Boris Johnson was actually going to deliver anything. Whereas Labour MPs will go, well, yeah, we're doing all this, we are going to deliver. So they will know that in a few years' time, things should be a lot better. There's absolutely no reason to go to pieces right now. You know, voters will rethink when they start to see those positive changes. So Starmer is safe, unless he does something monumentally stupid, which I don't think is very likely. Badenoch under more pressure. The local elections are likely to see, you know, severe losses, maybe savage losses, and her opponents will say it's a sign she's not moving on. The media frenzy and positive stories about Reform UK could well see them go ahead of the Tories in the polls. That would be really bad for Badenoch. That would certainly start some muttering about her. However, I don't think she'll be deposed this year. I mean, first of all, the Tories have got time. There's absolutely no need to panic. Second, even if they go below Reform UK in the polls, they will imagine that they can recover a bit later on, and probably would. And if Labour carry on doing badly in the polls and the Conservatives can go ahead of them, not just in like one random poll, but consistently, well, then that helps Badenoch. Badenoch will definitely be given more time there because Conservatives understand first past the post. It doesn't matter how many people support you. It just matters, are you the better option than the alternative, right? So it's very unlikely that Conservative MPs would get rid of Badenoch if she's polling ahead of Labour. And even if they're not, it's not going to help the Conservatives to keep changing the leader too frequently. They need a period of stability. And although Badenoch is saying some mad stuff, because she's in opposition, it's not creating like Liz Truss opened her mouth, well, via Kwasi Kwarteng, and the pound crashed because she was the Prime Minister. As leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch can say all sorts of mad things, and it doesn't cause a huge market reaction because no one believes it's going to turn into policy. So they just need this period of stability, and I think they know that, or they just risk losing out to Reform UK because they'll just look like chaotic. You know, the Conservatives can absolutely afford to give Badenoch 2 years and then they could give her 3, but they can easily give her 2 years. There's no need to get rid of her for 2 years. They can get rid of her then if she's not working out. As for other parties, they're not going to replace any leaders. Most of the other parties are delighted with their progress this year. Only the SNP did badly in the elections out of the others, but they're going to feel a recovery is on the cards with Labour's current unpopularity in the polls. Their next big target's Holyrood 2026. If Labour have not started to show the fruits of their labour, then the SNP should be in good shape for that. So there's no reason for them to panic and change leader again this year. So in summary, the Tories will probably suffer the most from the local elections, although Labour probably won't be popping champagne either. Labour have probably stopped announcing unpopular policies, so there isn't going to be a major impetus for the support they've lost is probably the support they're going to lose as a result of unpopular policies. But they could still lose support if people get to a point where they think, right, you've had enough time now and I'm still not much better off. But if Labour decide to tell people more about what they're doing and what the time frame is, then they could retain and even reacquire support. Reform UK are likely to keep gaining. Up to a point, they do have a ceiling. Unless, of course, there's a big explosion in Trump's America, which causes Farage some collateral damage. But there are so many unknown factors. It's really hard to say what is going to happen for certain. 2025 is the year when Labour pass the legislation for their major projects. Nothing much can happen until those laws are passed. So the major changes can't even begin until 2026, really, and may not be noticed until 2027. And so in that void of delivery, it's the battle for narratives which is important. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for listening, and until next time, I'll see you later.